The Pluto anime is now 1 year old, and if you know me, you know that I never shut up about this series and how much it means to me. So given the illustrious occasion, I figured now would be the perfect time to talk about what I believe may very well be the greatest robot story on Earth. For the few of you who've never heard of it, Pluto is a manga by Naoki Urasawa and Takashi Nagasaki that completely reimagines an arc from Osamu Tezuka's Astro Boy as a murder mystery, that arc being none other than The Greatest Robot on Earth. To this day, The Greatest Robot on Earth is one of the most beloved arcs from all of Astro Boy, with a very clear message of anti-violence, anti-hatred, and anti-war. The story of Pluto follows robot detective Gesicht as he investigates a series of murders being perpetrated against the 7 great robots of the world, as well as humans connected with the creation of the modern robot laws. At each of these murder sites, the perpetrator has left horns, resembling the Roman god of death, Pluto. But is the perpetrator a human, or is it a robot? And if it is a robot, what could that mean? Now, you do not need any prior familiarity with Astro Boy to read Pluto, and in fact, I personally think that going into Pluto before going through Astro Boy actually improves the experience by virtue of the mystery being completely unspoiled. Moreover, Pluto is so different from the original Astro Boy arc that it's practically its own thing entirely. Pluto's overall story maintains the heart and soul of the pacifist message that Tezuka wanted to convey, but otherwise only maintains the general skeleton of The Greatest Robot on Earth. It's completely different in narrative focus, tone, and depth. Nonetheless, I would still recommend reading or watching Astro Boy at some point, since part of Urasawa's aim with Pluto was to convince a more modern audience to check out Astro Boy, and with Astro Boy context, there's a lot more to Pluto that you'll come to appreciate. For the few of you who aren't familiar with Astro Boy, it is one of the most influential anime and manga of all time, created by the god of manga himself, Osamu Tezuka. Astro Boy is a futuristic story taking place in a world where humans and highly sentient robots coexist with one another, following a highly human-like robot named Adam, or Astro Boy, who is designed to replace the dead son of the scientist Dr. Umataro Tenma. With Adam having multiple different superpowers, the story is largely about him fighting crime, and is mostly villain of the week in narrative structure. But Astro Boy is unfortunately often mistaken for being little more than a mindless children's series about good robots fighting bad robots and bad people. In reality, however, it is a very deeply political series. Astro Boy is a story in large part about discrimination, racism, and xenophobia. In the story, robots are often treated as second-class citizens, with various human-led anti-robot factions conspiring to strip robots of their rights, abuse them for their own twisted goals, or wipe them out entirely. One of the ultimate messages of the story is that humans and robots were meant to be friends with one another, to live together in harmony and at peace. This message is of course a direct result of Tezuka's own life experiences, having grown up during and after World War II. Back when he was working as a doctor, he once had an incident in the hospital where an American troop stationed in Japan punched Tezuka right in the face. And that specific incident is one such moment that really shaped how the story of Astro Boy went, with him repeatedly trying to use the story as a means to depict a message of peace to people of all ages. At the time that Astro Boy was serializing, Osamu Tezuka was very vocal in his opposition to American militarism and the Vietnam War. It was to the point that there was even one chapter in Volume 6 called The Angel of Vietnam, in which after time traveling to 1969, Adam fights the US Air Force in an attempt to stop them from massacring innocent Vietnamese villagers. Pluto is very much a direct thematic continuation of everything Astro Boy, and more specifically, The Greatest Robot on Earth, were ever about. It's a story that stands firmly against hatred, against discrimination, and against war. It's in large part because of that when I first read the manga several years back, Pluto very quickly became one of my all-time favorite works of fiction. It's a deeply moving story, one that made me cry over and over again, especially as I read and reread the last couple of chapters. Being as theme-heavy as it is, it's a work that especially spoke to me. And later on, when I started going through Astro Boy, The more I read of it, the more my appreciation for Pluto grew. Pluto tremendously expands upon what was originally just a 170-page long arc into a full-fledged 8-volume long manga. And yet, even with Pluto being so much more fleshed out than Tezuka's original version of the arc, it's still tight and focused, wasting very little time. Pluto is a mere fraction of the length of the majority of Naoki Urasawa's other works, yet equally as compelling as the best of his best, both in terms of story and characters. You'd be hard-pressed to find someone that prefers the original version of The Greatest Robot on Earth to Pluto. Now, Pluto aims for a tone that's far darker, far more grim, and far more serious than the original Astro Boy, allowing for it to depict a much more refined story, targeted to adults instead of children. And as a result, all the characters are handled way differently from Tezuka's original manga, both recurring characters that appear all throughout Astro Boy, as well as those that only appear in The Greatest Robot on Earth. With regards to the recurring characters, I think the most interesting cases to look at in Pluto are with Adam, Uran, and Dr. Tenma. The general concept behind each of their characters remains the same, with their backstories being identical to how they are in Astro Boy. But the dynamics between them and the depth of their characterization are quite different. I especially like the way Dr. Tenma's character is handled, with Pluto better rationalizing the reasons for and motivations behind all his actions better than the Astro Boy manga. In doing so, Urasawa also manages to thematically connect Pluto with most of his other works, which all center around the idea of family. After all, a huge emphasis of Pluto's story is placed on parent-child relationships, and most prominently, fatherhood. So if you're a fan of Urasawa's previous works, I think you'll really appreciate this aspect of Pluto as well. With regards to the non-recurring characters who only appear within the span of this arc, I also really like what Urasawa managed to do with Pluto the character and the 7 Great Robots, whereas the original version of The Greatest Robot on Earth is told mostly from Pluto the character's perspective. The Pluto manga instead follows the perspectives of the 7 Great Robots of the world, leaving Pluto the character's actions and identity a complete mystery. Even then, Urasawa and Nagasaki managed to make Pluto a significantly more compelling character all the while, a result of both the story's length as well as how he's completely reimagined from how he is in the original story. And as for the 7 Great Robots of the world, they actually only appear in the original Astro Boy for just a couple of pages each, being little more than minor characters that move the plot forward. Gesicht, for instance, only shows up for 7 pages in Tezuka's original version of the arc. In Pluto, however, Urasawa and Nagasaki turned those robots into proper characters of their own, with their own backstories and motivations that thematically connect with the story's overall message. The manga even dedicates around 1 volume per character to run a series of full-fledged character studies, my absolute favorite of which are On North No. 2 and Epsilon, who are just astronomically improved upon from the original Astro Boy. And of course, Robot Detective Gesicht is made into the story's protagonist, and heck of a compelling and inspiring protagonist at that. But that's enough about the characters. Some of you might be wondering about my thoughts on the anime adaptation specifically. Honestly, I think the anime's very existence is an absolute miracle, considering that it took an entire decade to produce, and that it came out 2 decades after the manga started serializing, a point by which there'd have been no financial incentive to adapt it. In fact, it almost bankrupted its production company Genko with how long, intensive, and expensive production the Pluto anime was. But this was the passion project of the legendary anime producer Masao Maruyama, who desperately wanted to adapt Pluto into an anime before dying, both out of a desire to convey its profound message to the whole world, and also due to being the only producer connected to both Tezuka and Urasawa. In the end, after a crazy long production, the staff managed to pull through, and the long wait was absolutely worth it. The animation, direction, music, and pacing were all close to perfect, and as an adaptation, it was very faithful to the source while still managing to make a few excellent additions and rearrangements to the story. I consider Pluto to be the best anime of the decade so far, and honestly, I prefer the anime to the manga. But the anime's release also reminded me of just how Pluto and its message are more relevant today than ever before. Not simply because of the proliferation of artificial intelligence, but also because we're living in a world with multiple ongoing genocides and unprecedented levels of hatred, racism, and xenophobia. We have some of the world's most influential people using their platforms to try and scapegoat minorities, to try and depict some groups of people as inferior or less human or deserving of death and genocide, just because they're different. In the midst of the current state of the world, Pluto serves as a grave reminder of what it means to truly be human, as well as what it means for someone to lose their humanity, a theme which Pluto shares with a few of Urasawa's other works. In Monster, Urasawa posits that to lose your humanity and become a monster is when you consider one person's life inherently worth less than someone else's. Pluto, to a great extent, showcases strong thematic continuity with Monster, with the way it explores the relationship between humans and robots, as well as those between people in countries at the global core and the periphery. With regards to the relationships between humans and robots, in story there exists an extremist group known as the KR, very similar to another group seen today in rural parts of the United States. The KR members congregate dressed up hooded entirely in white and believe that robots are inferior to human beings and should be nothing more than slaves without rights. Unfortunately, these kinds of sentiments are present in real life too, but instead of with robots, with people of color and other minority groups. But in story, this unfathomable level of hatred isn't only present between humans and robots, but also between humans and other humans, and even between robots and other robots. At the individual level, you can examine practically every character in the story, whether human or robot, from the lens of hatred. You could effectively consider Pluto to be a series of character studies revolving around the ideas of hatred, violence, and war. And on the macro scale, you can see these ideas perpetuated at the international level. Pluto as a whole serves as Urasawa's and Nagasaki's critique of the United States' actions during the Iraq War, whereby the US invaded Iraq under the false pretenses of Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. At the time, the international community was in uproar about the US's needless invasion. The 9/11 Commission ultimately established that there was no evidence whatsoever that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government had any weapons of mass destruction, and thus the UN had declared the US's invasion of Iraq illegal and a clear violation of international law. But of course, being the world superpower and one of the P5 nations, it's not like they could really do anything to deter the US. So of course, they just got away with it. Pluto has a very similar scenario. The United States of Thrakia invades the kingdom of Persia under the false pretense of them having robots of mass destruction and ties to terrorists. Much like the real-life 9/11 Commission, Pluto has what they call the Bora Investigation Commission, which also concluded that there was no evidence whatsoever that Persia was building robots of mass destruction. In reality, Thrakia just invaded Persia for their own geopolitical gains, and in doing so, they had effectively committed genocide against people whose lives they had determined to be inherently worth less than their own. They weren't there to liberate the oppressed and establish democracy. They were there to slaughter innocents, as if they were livestock. So Pluto is a story that you can connect both with real-life human politics and history, as well as with yourself individually through all of its character studies. Even years after finishing it, this is something that'll stick with you for ages. Will the day that hatred disappears ever come? We don't know. We can only pray for that day to arrive, as we all should. At the end of the day, Pluto is not just about robots. It's a story about kindness, a story about love, a story about forgiveness. It's a manga that stands against violence, discrimination, and hatred of all forms. It's a tale that reminds us all of what it truly means to be human, through a story that largely follows machines that are often more humane than many humans. Hatred breeds more hatred, violence breeds more violence, and war yields humanity nothing. So live your life with as much empathy and compassion as you can muster. We, all of us, we're all one, regardless of meaningless divisions like race, gender, nationality, religion, and sexuality. I have personally never ever found a robot story nearly as compelling as Pluto. At least for me, I believe that it may very well be the greatest robot story on Earth. And if you haven't read or watched Pluto yet, I would urge you to give it a go. Pluto is nothing short of a masterpiece and one of my favorite stories ever made. To all of you, thanks for watching, and happy first anniversary to the Pluto anime.